The loudest person in the room isn't always the one telling the truth, but they're usually the one everyone remembers first. I learned that lesson on a humid Tuesday evening inside the Maple Ridge HOA clubhouse, where a routine monthly meeting unraveled before anyone had finished the first page of the agenda. My name is Ethan Carter, and I had attended more homeowners association meetings than I cared to count. Most ended with polite disagreements over landscaping, parking spaces, or mailbox paint colors. This one began with something entirely different. The sharp scrape of a chair echoed across the polished wooden floor before I even looked up from my notes. Rebecca Collins was already on her feet. She marched toward the front of the room with a white envelope clutched tightly in one hand and a folded receipt waving in the other. Her face was flushed with determination, her shoulders squared, and every confident step announced that she had come prepared for a fight. Conversations stopped one by one until only the low hum of the ceiling air conditioner filled the silence. Every head turned toward her. "You charged me for a service I never approved," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "And tonight, you're giving every penny back." Several neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Others immediately reached for their phones, sensing the beginning of another neighborhood drama that would surely spread through community social media before sunrise. Linda Harper, our HOA president, remained seated at the front table. She didn't interrupt. She simply folded her hands together and waited for Rebecca to continue. That calm response only seemed to frustrate Rebecca even more. She stepped closer to the board table and placed the folded receipt down with enough force for everyone nearby to hear the paper slap against the polished surface. "Here's the proof," she declared. "I paid a service fee that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Either someone made a mistake, or someone hoped nobody would notice." A ripple of whispers spread through the audience. The word fraud floated quietly from somewhere near the back row. I stayed where I was, saying nothing. Years of handling legal disputes had taught me that the first version of any public accusation was rarely the complete story. Emotion arrives long before evidence does. Rebecca unfolded the paper and held it high enough for several rows of homeowners to see. "This receipt is dated 6 months ago," she continued. "I've asked for a refund twice. I've been ignored twice. So now we're going to settle it where everyone can watch." The atmosphere changed instantly. People who had arrived expecting a discussion about landscaping contracts suddenly leaned forward in their seats. Even board members exchanged uncertain looks. I finally reached for the meeting packet lying in front of me. Buried inside was a summary of monthly financial reports, vendor invoices, and routine maintenance expenses. Nothing immediately caught my attention. Nothing suggested missing money or unauthorized charges. That alone didn't prove anything. Good records can hide honest mistakes just as easily as they can expose them. Rebecca stood motionless, waiting for someone to deny her accusation. Nobody did. Linda quietly asked if she could examine the receipt. Rebecca hesitated before sliding it across the table. I caught only a brief glimpse from where I sat, but something about it felt strangely familiar. Not suspicious, not obviously wrong, just incomplete. It was only a single receipt. Yet somehow, I already had the uneasy feeling that it would become the most important piece of paper anyone in Maple Ridge would talk about for a very long time. What Rebecca didn't realize was that sometimes the strongest evidence isn't what appears on a receipt. It's everything that should have been attached to it. I didn't reach for the receipt the moment the meeting adjourned. Everyone else seemed eager to see it, passing around theories with the confidence that only incomplete information can create. Some neighbors insisted the board had finally been caught. Others argued Rebecca was exaggerating another routine billing issue. I stayed behind while folding my notebook shut, listening instead of speaking. Years of practicing law had taught me that facts become quieter as emotions grow louder. By the time I stepped into the hallway, small groups had already formed beneath the warm yellow lights outside the clubhouse. I overheard the words fraud, lawsuit, and corruption more than once. Amazing how quickly a neighborhood could convict someone before seeing a single piece of verified evidence. Linda caught up with me near the entrance, the folded receipt resting carefully inside a transparent document sleeve. "Would you mind taking a look?" she asked. "Something about this doesn't sit right." I nodded without answering. We walked into the small administrative office beside the meeting room, where the air smelled faintly of printer toner and old paper. Linda placed the receipt on the desk between us. It looked authentic. The paper had naturally faded around the edges, and the printed ink showed the slight imperfections common to thermal receipts after several months. The amount wasn't unusually large. The vendor's name was familiar. The payment date matched a maintenance period from earlier that year. At first glance, Rebecca's argument appeared reasonable. Then I noticed what wasn't there. No invoice number. No service description beyond a generic phrase. No attached authorization form. A receipt records that money changed hands. It doesn't explain why. I asked Linda a simple question. Do we keep supporting documents for vendor services? She gave a small smile. Every single one. We archive everything. That answer immediately shifted my attention away from the receipt itself. If complete records existed, the receipt was only one page inside a much larger story. Linda unlocked the association's document management system while I searched through payment records from 6 months earlier. Vendor invoices appeared exactly where I expected. Landscaping, pool maintenance, security patrols, exterior inspections. Everything balanced with the monthly financial reports approved by the board. Nothing suggested hidden charges or unexplained transactions. Even so, Rebecca's payment was there, listed under the same vendor shown on the receipt. The accounting system confirmed the amount had been received and properly recorded. That should have settled the issue. Instead, it created a new question. If the payment had been legitimate, why was Rebecca so certain she deserved a refund? People forget conversations. They misremember dates. But they rarely invent financial disputes out of nowhere. I opened another archive containing homeowner correspondence. Hundreds of emails filled the screen, sorted by address, date, and subject. Maintenance requests, architectural approvals, gate access problems, fee questions. Rebecca's name appeared more often than I expected. Most messages were ordinary and professionally written. Nothing sounded hostile. Nothing hinted at an ongoing conflict with the board until roughly 6 months ago. Then, just as I prepared to open the first email from that period, I noticed something odd. The conversation thread referenced an attachment that wasn't stored with the rest of the file. It wasn't marked as deleted. It simply wasn't there. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the empty attachment field for several seconds. The receipt hadn't convinced me that the HOA was guilty, but the missing document convinced me the story wasn't complete. Somewhere between Rebecca's certainty and the board's records, one missing piece of paper had quietly disappeared, and I had a feeling finding it would change everything. There is a moment in every investigation when the facts stop answering your questions and begin asking their own. That moment arrived just after 9 o'clock that evening. The clubhouse had emptied hours earlier, leaving only the occasional buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of sprinklers outside washing over the quiet neighborhood. Linda had gone home, trusting me with temporary access to the association's archives. I wasn't looking for proof that Rebecca Collins was wrong. I was looking for the missing connection that explained why she believed she was right. The incomplete email thread stayed open on my monitor while I searched deeper into the archive. Every homeowner request generated a reference number. Every approved service created a vendor work order. Every completed payment linked to an invoice. Maple Ridge wasn't perfect, but whoever designed its record-keeping system had believed in documentation. That made the missing attachment impossible to ignore. I searched by invoice number. Nothing. I searched by vendor name. The same receipt appeared again, connected to a completed payment, but still no authorization form. I expanded the search beyond the homeowner database and into the vendor correspondence folder. Hundreds of scanned invoices appeared in chronological order. My eyes moved steadily across file names until one detail interrupted the pattern. There was a gap. 2 invoices before Rebecca's payment. 3 invoices after it. The sequence skipped exactly one document. Not deleted. Not corrupted. Simply absent. I leaned closer to the screen, replaying the timeline in my head. Vendors don't usually forget invoices. Accounting departments certainly don't pay them without one. Somewhere, that missing page had existed. The question was whether it had disappeared by accident or because someone had filed it somewhere else. I picked up the office phone and called the maintenance contractor listed on the receipt. To my surprise, someone answered even that late. The owner recognized Maple Ridge immediately. After introducing myself, I asked whether they still kept archived work orders from 6 months earlier. Everything's backed up, he replied. Paper copies and digital scans. We never throw them away. My pulse quickened just enough to notice. 10 minutes later, an email notification appeared. Inside were copies of the vendor's archived records. The invoice matched the HOA ledger perfectly. The payment amount matched the receipt in Rebecca's hand. The completion date matched the financial report approved that month. Nothing suggested fraud. Then I noticed something else attached to the vendor package. A cover sheet. Not an invoice. Not a receipt. A service request authorization requiring a homeowner's signature before the work could begin. The scanned copy I received had every page except the final one containing the signature itself. The contractor apologized in his email, explaining that older scans were occasionally separated during batch uploads. He promised to check physical storage the following morning. I stared at the incomplete document for several seconds. The missing signature page had suddenly become the most important document in the entire dispute. Without it, Rebecca could genuinely believe she had never approved the service. With it, the entire accusation might collapse. Outside the office windows, the sprinklers shut off, leaving the neighborhood wrapped in complete silence. I closed the vendor file and looked once more at the receipt lying beside my keyboard. 24 hours earlier, it had been presented as undeniable proof against the HOA. Now it felt more like the first chapter of a file that someone had accidentally separated. Whether that final page confirmed Rebecca's story or destroyed it, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth was no longer hiding inside the receipt. It was hiding behind the page that had gone missing. The answer arrived in the least dramatic way imaginable. There were no anonymous envelopes, no mysterious phone calls, and no last-minute confessions. At exactly 8:17 the following morning, my inbox chimed with a message from the maintenance contractor. The subject line contained only 6 words: "Found the missing signature page." I opened the attachment before the email had even fully loaded. The scan was crisp despite the age of the paper. Across the top was the same service request authorization I had reviewed the night before. The work order number matched the receipt. The property address matched Rebecca Collins' home. The vendor information matched every accounting record in the HOA database. Then my eyes moved to the bottom of the page. There it was, a neatly written signature. Rebecca Collins. Dated 2 days before the service had been performed. Beneath the signature sat a sentence printed in plain language. Homeowner authorizes the requested service and accepts the associated service fee. I read the page again, then a third time. Good investigators learn to distrust excitement. Evidence deserves verification before celebration. I compared the work order number with the accounting ledger. Perfect match. I compared the date with the payment history. Perfect match. I compared the vendor reference with the archived invoice. Again, a perfect match. Every document pointed toward the same timeline. Rebecca had requested the service. The contractor had completed it. The HOA had processed the payment exactly as authorized. The receipt she presented during the meeting had never been false. It had simply been separated from the page explaining why it existed. Linda arrived a few minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee. She studied my expression before setting 1 cup beside the keyboard. "You found something." Instead of answering, I rotated the monitor toward her. She silently read the authorization form from top to bottom. When she reached the signature, she exhaled slowly and leaned back in her chair. "Well," she finally whispered, "that changes everything." I nodded, although one thought continued bothering me. "Not everything," I replied. "It explains the payment." "It doesn't explain Rebecca." Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" I tapped the signature gently with my finger. "If this document is genuine, and I believe it is, then Rebecca either forgot signing it or never received a copy afterward. People don't usually stand in front of an entire neighborhood and accuse someone of stealing their money if they knowingly approve the charge." Linda remained quiet. She understood exactly what I meant. There is a difference between proving someone mistaken and proving someone dishonest. At that moment, I had accomplished only the first. We assembled every related document into a single folder. The service request, the signed authorization, the contractor's invoice, the HOA payment record, the homeowner receipt, the email confirmations. For the first time since the confrontation, the file read like one complete story instead of disconnected fragments. Every page supported the next. Every date aligned. Every signature belonged exactly where it should. Looking across the stack of papers, I realized something almost ironic. The smallest document in the entire file had caused the largest controversy, because it had traveled alone. Remove one page from a sequence, and an ordinary transaction can begin to resemble misconduct. Add that missing page back, and the mystery quietly disappears. I closed the folder and slid it toward the center of the desk. Tomorrow night's special HOA meeting was already scheduled. Rebecca expected to continue demanding her refund in front of the entire community. This time, however, she wouldn't be facing a single receipt. She would be facing the complete story that the receipt had never been able to tell by itself. The room was even quieter than it had been the first night, but this time the silence carried anticipation instead of surprise. Every seat inside the Maple Ridge Clubhouse had been filled 15 minutes before the special meeting officially began. Residents stood along the back wall with folded arms while others whispered to neighbors, replaying Rebecca Collins' accusation from the previous evening. The receipt had become the neighborhood's favorite topic overnight. Some believed tonight would expose financial misconduct inside the HOA. Others expected Rebecca to receive the refund she had demanded. Only a handful of us knew the story had already changed. I placed a neatly organized folder on the conference table in front of me and looked around the room. Inside were the documents I had reviewed repeatedly that morning. The receipt, the vendor invoice, the payment ledger, the email confirmations, and finally, resting beneath everything else, the missing authorization page bearing Rebecca's signature. I had no intention of presenting any of them immediately. Truth has a better chance of surviving when it isn't rushed. Linda opened the meeting with a calm welcome before briefly explaining why everyone had gathered again. She then turned toward Rebecca. "You asked for an opportunity to address the board and the community. You have the floor." Rebecca stood confidently, wearing the same determined expression I had seen the night before. She walked to the front of the room, carrying the white envelope that had already become strangely recognizable to everyone present. "Thank you," she began. "I don't enjoy standing here, but homeowners deserve accountability. 6 months ago, I was charged a service fee that I never approved. I've requested a refund twice. I've received nothing except excuses." Several residents nodded. In agreement, Rebecca carefully unfolded the receipt and held it where everyone could see. "This is all the proof anyone should need," she continued. "Money left my account for a service I didn't authorize. If this happened to me, it could happen to anyone sitting in this room." Murmurs spread through the audience again. She spoke with conviction, and conviction is persuasive even before evidence is examined. Rebecca continued describing her frustration with unanswered emails and delayed responses. To anyone hearing the story for the first time, her account sounded entirely reasonable. Every sentence fit naturally with the receipt she carried. Every detail seemed to reinforce the conclusion she had already reached. I listened without interrupting. Occasionally, I glanced at the folder resting in front of me, resisting the temptation to reach for it. People often assume winning an argument means speaking first. In my experience, it usually means understanding exactly when to remain silent. Rebecca eventually finished and looked directly toward the board. "So," she asked firmly, "is anyone finally prepared to admit this charge never should have happened?" The room fell completely still. Every eye shifted toward Linda. Instead of answering herself, she slowly turned in my direction. "Ethan," she said quietly, "would you mind reviewing what you found?" I stood without haste and carried the folder to the front table. The papers inside remained closed beneath my hand. I wasn't interested in embarrassing Rebecca or proving someone foolish. My responsibility was much simpler than that. I wanted every homeowner in that room to leave with the same understanding of the facts. Looking across the audience, I noticed Rebecca watching me with complete confidence, certain the receipt in her hand had already settled the matter. She had no idea that the document she believed ended the argument was only the first page of a much longer story. I've always believed that evidence deserves to be introduced with the same respect as a witness. If you rush it, people stop listening. If you present it carefully, it speaks for itself. I rested both hands on the folder and looked around the clubhouse before saying a single word. Every face in the room reflected a different expectation. Some anticipated an apology from the HOA. Others expected a legal argument. Rebecca stood only a few feet away, still holding the receipt that had fueled 2 days of rumors throughout Maple Ridge. "Rebecca," I began calmly, "everything you've shown tonight is authentic." A wave of whispers swept through the audience. Rebecca nodded immediately, as though my first sentence had confirmed everything she had been saying. The receipt is real, I continued. The payment is real. The amount is correct. The date is correct. None of those facts are being challenged. Her expression relaxed for the first time that evening. Then I opened the folder. The first document I placed on the projector screen was the contractor's invoice. It displayed the same work order number printed on Rebecca's receipt. I allowed everyone a few seconds to read it before moving to the next page. The HOA payment ledger appeared beside it. Once again, the numbers matched perfectly. The audience remained quiet. Nobody interrupted. Nobody objected. They were following the paper trail one document at a time. Next came the email confirmation sent to the contractor after the service request had been approved. The timestamp aligned precisely with the invoice. I could almost feel the room shifting. People who had arrived expecting conflict were now watching a timeline unfold instead. Rebecca crossed her arms, studying each page carefully. She still appeared confident, but the certainty in her posture had begun to soften. So far, she said, all you've shown is that someone processed my payment. That's correct, I answered. Which brings us to the document that wasn't included with your receipt. I reached into the folder one final time and removed the missing authorization page. Without saying another word, I placed it onto the projector. The clubhouse became completely silent. The service request filled the screen in sharp detail. Property address, vendor information, description of the requested service, authorized fee. Every line matched the documents already displayed. Then everyone's eyes settled. On the bottom of the page, Rebecca's signature. Clear, complete, dated 2 days before the work had been performed. I didn't point to it. I didn't need to. The room found it on its own. Rebecca stared at the screen without speaking. She stepped closer as though distance alone might change what she was seeing. That's, she whispered before stopping herself. Her eyes moved slowly between the signature and the receipt still clutched in her hand. We verified the document with the contractor this morning, I explained quietly. It came directly from their physical archive. The work order, invoice, payment record, and your receipt all referenced the same transaction. They were never separate documents. One page was simply missing from the file you received. No one celebrated. No one applauded. The truth had entered the room too quietly for that. Rebecca lowered the receipt until it rested against her side. The confidence that had carried her through 2 public meetings had given way to genuine confusion. Looking at her expression, I no longer saw someone trying to deceive an entire community. I saw someone confronting a forgotten decision preserved on a single sheet of paper. In that moment, the argument ended exactly the way it had begun, with one receipt. The difference was that now everyone had finally seen the page that gave it its meaning. Silence has a strange weight when it follows certainty. Only minutes earlier, Rebecca Collins had stood in front of the entire community, convinced she had uncovered misconduct. Now the only sound inside the clubhouse was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft rustle of papers as homeowners looked from the projector to the receipt still resting in Rebecca's hand. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody wanted to interrupt the moment when assumptions quietly gave way to facts. Rebecca remained frozen for several seconds, her eyes fixed on the signature projected across the screen. Then she took one careful step forward. "May I see it?" she asked, her voice noticeably softer than before. I slid the original authorization form across the table without hesitation. She studied every line, tracing the printed work order with one finger before stopping at the signature near the bottom of the page. I watched her expression change, not from defiance to embarrassment, but from certainty to recognition. It was the unmistakable look of someone remembering something they had completely forgotten. "I remember requesting the estimate," she said almost to herself. I thought I decided against it." I nodded gently. The contractor's records show the authorization was signed 2 days later. The work wasn't scheduled until after that approval. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, searching through memories from 6 months earlier. "That was the same week my father was discharged from the hospital," she said quietly. Everything felt chaotic. I barely remember half of those days. The room remained respectful. No one laughed. No one whispered. The community had arrived expecting conflict, but what they were witnessing instead was something far more human. Memory had failed. Documentation had not. Rebecca placed the authorization form back onto the table with remarkable care, as though it deserved an apology of its own. She looked toward Linda first. "I owe you an apology." Then she turned toward the rest of the board. "And all of you." Her words came slowly, without excuses. I believe the receipt told the entire story because it was the only document I still had. I convinced myself someone had ignored me when, in reality, I was missing part of the record. Linda smiled kindly. "We appreciate you saying that." Rebecca then faced the homeowners filling the clubhouse. "I also owe everyone here an apology for making accusations before I understood all the facts." Several residents nodded. One elderly homeowner quietly thanked her for being honest. Another admitted he had already begun questioning the board after hearing the original complaint. It was a reminder of how quickly doubt spreads through a community and how much longer trust takes to rebuild. I gathered the documents back into their folder one page at a time. Looking at the complete file, I realized none of the evidence had actually changed over the past 6 months. The invoice had always existed. The payment ledger had always balanced. The authorization had always been sitting inside a contractor's archive. The only thing that had changed was that every piece now sat together where it belonged. Before closing the folder, I looked once more at the receipt that had started everything. It hadn't lied. It had simply been incomplete. Sometimes the greatest misunderstandings don't come from false evidence at all. They come from evidence that arrives without its missing pages. As the meeting slowly drew to a close, the tension that had divided the room seemed to dissolve almost unnoticed. No one had won. No one had lost. The truth had simply found enough pieces to become visible, and that was more valuable than any refund ever could have been. Some victories don't sound like celebrations. They sound like ordinary conversations returning to a room that had almost forgotten how to have them. As homeowners slowly gathered their belongings and drifted toward the clubhouse doors, the atmosphere felt completely different from the one I had walked into less than an hour earlier. The tension had dissolved into quiet discussions. People weren't debating accusations anymore. They were talking about records, communication, and how easily an incomplete file had created a misunderstanding that spread through an entire neighborhood. Rebecca remained near the front of the room after most residents had left. She waited patiently until Linda finished answering a few final questions before approaching us again. This time there was no envelope in her hand, no receipt raised above her head, no determination to prove someone wrong. "Would you have a few minutes?" she asked. Linda smiled and motioned toward the conference table. We all sat down without the audience that had watched every earlier exchange. Rebecca rested her hands together and let out a slow breath. "I've been thinking about something," she admitted. "If I had received copies of every document after the work was completed, I probably never would have questioned the charge." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair point." She opened the same folder we had presented during the meeting. Our records were complete, but our communication could have been better. We archived everything internally, yet homeowners only received portions of the paperwork depending on the vendor. Rebecca looked down at the authorization form once more. "I honestly don't remember signing it until I saw it tonight. Once I did, everything came back." It was an incredibly stressful week, and after several months, the receipt became the only thing I could still find. I understood exactly how that could happen. Human memory rarely preserves complete timelines. It keeps isolated moments instead. A single receipt in a kitchen drawer can easily outlive the conversations, emails, and paperwork that once surrounded it. "Documentation protects everyone," I said quietly. "Not just the HOA. Homeowners too." Rebecca gave a small smile. "I think I finally understand that." Before leaving, Linda suggested a practical solution rather than simply moving on from the incident. Beginning the following month, every homeowner requesting optional services would automatically receive a complete digital packet containing the authorization form, vendor invoice, payment confirmation, and receipt in one file. Nothing would exist as a single page anymore. Every document would travel together from beginning to end. It wasn't a dramatic policy change. It didn't require expensive software or complicated legal revisions. It simply acknowledged one important lesson the community had learned together. Information loses meaning when it becomes separated from its context. Over the next several weeks, I noticed something interesting around Maple Ridge. The conversations that had once centered on blame slowly shifted toward cooperation. Residents asked more questions before making assumptions. Board members explained procedures with greater transparency. Even routine maintenance requests became easier because everyone understood exactly what paperwork they would receive. Rebecca attended the next monthly meeting just like everyone else. She wasn't treated differently, nor did she expect to be. When the agenda reached homeowner comments, she briefly thanked the board for improving the documentation process and encouraged neighbors to keep complete records for their own protection as well. Her statement lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it probably restored more confidence than any formal resolution could have accomplished. Walking back to my car that evening beneath the quiet glow of the streetlights, I realized the dispute had never really been about a refund. It had been about trust. And trust, unlike money, isn't recovered by proving someone wrong. It's rebuilt one honest conversation, one complete record, and one thoughtful improvement at a time. People often ask me what the most important document in that case was. They expect me to answer with the signed authorization form because it revealed the missing truth. Others assume it was the receipt because it started the entire dispute. The real answer is neither. The most important document was the complete file after every page had finally been reunited. A single piece of paper can support almost any conclusion when it stands alone. Context is what transforms information into truth. Several months after the meeting, I found myself back inside the Maple Ridge Clubhouse on another ordinary Tuesday evening. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. Fresh coffee sat on the refreshment table near the entrance, filling the room with its familiar aroma. Residents chatted comfortably before the meeting began, discussing holiday decorations, landscaping plans, and the annual neighborhood picnic. It was exactly the kind of uneventful gathering every homeowners association hopes to have. Rebecca arrived a few minutes early carrying a laptop instead of a folder filled with complaints. She smiled as she greeted Linda before taking her usual seat. During a break in the agenda, she walked over to me. "I wanted to show you something," she said. She opened her laptop and displayed a neatly organized digital folder. Every home improvement project she had approved during the previous year now contained its own complete record. Estimates, authorizations, invoices, receipts, email confirmations, and payment summaries all sat together in chronological order. "I figured if one missing page caused that much confusion once," she said with a quiet laugh, "I'd never let it happen again." I smiled. That's probably the best outcome this entire situation could have produced. She closed the laptop. "You know," she admitted, "I used to think keeping records was something organizations did to protect themselves. Now I realize good records protect everyone involved." That simple observation stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Walking through the neighborhood afterward, I noticed porch lights glowing beneath the evening sky while sprinklers quietly watered neatly maintained lawns. Nothing about Maple Ridge looked extraordinary. It was simply a community that had learned a valuable lesson together without lawsuits, public humiliation, or lasting resentment. The board became more transparent. Homeowners became more informed. Communication became clearer. Everyone accepted a small share of responsibility for making the system stronger than it had been before. Looking back, I never considered Rebecca my opponent. She asked difficult questions because she genuinely believed something was wrong. The HOA wasn't my client because it was automatically correct. It earned credibility because the evidence supported its actions. Justice isn't choosing sides before the facts are known. Justice is allowing every fact to find its proper place before reaching a conclusion. Before leaving the clubhouse that evening, I stopped beside the filing cabinet where the original documents had been archived. I placed the complete folder inside, making sure every page remained together exactly as it should. Receipt, invoice, payment record, email confirmations, authorization form. One complete story preserved in one complete file. I closed the drawer and heard the quiet click of the lock echo through the empty office. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. But somehow it felt final. The argument that had once divided an entire neighborhood had ended not because someone shouted louder or argued better, but because one forgotten page found its way back to where it had always belonged. That experience reminded me of something I carry into every dispute I investigate. Justice rarely announces itself with applause. More often, it arrives quietly, documented line by line, waiting patiently for someone willing to read the entire story before deciding what the truth really is.